And we now come to the statements. I'll just let the front benches swap over. Paymaster General Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would like to provide an update to the House on the progress made to provide compensation to victims of the infected blood scandal. In May 2024, the Infected Blood Inquiries report exposed a catalogue of failures at systemic, collective and individual level. Thousands of lives were needlessly lost, and too many people continue to suffer as a result of failures stretching back decades. I welcome the commitment across the House to holding the Government to account in responding to the inquiry's recommendations, and I will continue to provide regular updates on the Government's progress. In December 2024, I published the Government's response to the Infected Blood Inquiry, where I, on behalf of the UK Government, and indeed working closely with the devolved governments, accepted either in full or indeed in principle all 12 of the inquiry's recommendations. I will provide a further update on these regulations in May of this year, as requested by the inquiry. I will now turn to update the House specifically on the inquiry's recommendation on compensation. In August 2024, I established the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme in regulations. This enabled the Infected Blood Compensation Authority, IBCA, to begin making compensation payments to people who are infected. I was pleased that IBCA delivered on our shared commitment to make the first compensation payments by the end of last year. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, was a significant step, and the work to progress payments quickly continues as an absolute priority. Yesterday, I laid before Parliament the draft Infected Blood Compensation Scheme Regulations 2025. As these regulations are subject to the draft affirmative procedure, there will be an opportunity for parliamentarians to debate and approve them before they become law. When laying the previous regulations to establish the scheme for people who are infected and claiming compensation under the core route, I made a commitment on the floor of this House for these regulations to come into force by the 31st of March, subject to parliamentary approval. I would welcome the support of the House to approve these regulations and enable us to deliver compensation to those who deserve it as quickly as possible. I am fully aware of how important it is to this House and to many victims of this appalling scandal that the Government provides clear and regular updates on our progress in establishing the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme. Therefore, I am here today to explain the steps that have been taken and what they mean. Once approved by Parliament and in force, the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme Regulations 2025 will provide IBCA with the powers it needs to begin making payments to eligible affected people. By way of reminder, those affected include partners, parents, children, siblings, and in some instances, carers. These people have suffered terribly from the impact of infected blood on their loved ones, and these regulations mark a significant milestone for them. The Government will do all we can to support IBCA's aim of the first compensation payments to eligible affected people being made before the end of this year. And by laying these regulations, we are a step closer to achieving that aim. As we set out in August, the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme is tariff-based. The tariffs are intended to work in a way which would be appropriate for the majority of people applying to the scheme. However, we know that the impact infected blood has on people's lives varies hugely. Each person's experience is unique and heartbreaking, And the government recognises that there are some exceptional cases where the level of compensation offered through the core route does not sufficiently address a person's individual circumstances. For this reason, the government has provided for higher levels of compensation for specific awards through the supplementary route, where people can demonstrate their eligibility. The regulations I have laid before Parliament set out the details of that supplemental route. Once in force, the regulations will allow IBCA to make payments to eligible people through both the core and supplementary routes. All applicants will need to go through their initial core route assessment before applying to the supplementary route, but doing so will not delay payment of that initial core compensation offer. The regulations I have laid propose to restate and consolidate the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme Regulations 2024, which were approved by Parliament in October of last year. We have done this primarily for reasons of simplicity, having a single set of regulations which consolidate the provisions means that it has been possible to cover all compensation routes for all eligible people in a single place. Alongside laying the draft regulations, yesterday we published an accompanying explanatory memorandum and equalities impact assessment. We also updated the compensation scheme explainer on gov.uk. I have heard from the community the importance of a more simpler document, so I commit today for a wider, simpler document to be published. I have already engaged with several honourable and right honourable members across the House in recent days, and I will continue to do so on the substance of these regulations in the coming weeks. I would also like to welcome, Madam Deputy Speaker, the progress being made in delivering compensation. In addition to the over £1 billion of interim compensation payments that have been paid so far, IBCA have now invited 113 people to claim compensation. So far, 23 offers have been made, totalling over £34 million, and 14 offers have been accepted and paid, totalling over £13 million. IBCA remains on track to invite 250 people to apply by the end of March and will continue to publish their monthly statistics on their website. However, this is only the beginning, and there is much more work to do. This week, IBCA set out their plans to open the compensation service in stages to make sure it is effective and secure for all those claiming. This was a decision taken independently of the government by the IBCA board. The groups that IBCA will work through as they build the claim service will be as follows. Firstly, people who are living infected and are already registered with a support scheme. IBCA already has the details of these people through the infected blood support schemes and began making payments to this group in 2024. IBCA intends to accelerate the number of claims it is processing from April. The second stage will be people making supplementary claims. The regulations I am laying provide IBCA with the ability to process these claims. As IBCA develops their service, this will enable IBCA to process different types of evidence needed for supplementary claims and allow people to settle their claims in full as quickly as possible. People who have registered estates are in the third group IBCA have set out. This is where an estate has already been verified as eligible for compensation through the interim payment scheme that I announced in October last year. This will ensure that significant compensation can reach multiple people, which could include people who are both infected and affected. People who are affected and linked to a registered infected person or registered estate will be in the fourth group. If an infected person or an estate is registered, this will allow IBCA to progress an affected person's claim more quickly. The fifth group which the service will be developed for is people who are infected but not registered with a support scheme. The sixth group will be people who are either applying on behalf of an infected person who has not previously been registered with an infected blood support scheme, or people who are affected and not linked to a registered claim. IBCA expects that it may take slightly longer to work through claims where people have not previously been registered for compensation. Now, the IBCA board assure me that this is in no way intended as a prioritisation of different claimants, but as the best way of building the service so that IBCA can get to the point where it can progress all claims as quickly as possible. Crucially, it does not mean all claims in each group need to be finished before developing and opening the service for the next group. IBCA have communicated their decision on their website through the regular community update and have written to members of the infected blood community and honourable and right honourable members with whom they have previously engaged to inform them of their plans. Now, determining these groupings is a heavy responsibility, and I am pleased that IBCA sought feedback from the infected blood community to reach this decision. The community are, after all, those who must be kept at the centre of all this work. Whilst the rollout of the scheme is an operational decision for IBCA as an independent body, I fully support their commitment to moving forward as swiftly as possible and was encouraged to see the dedication of their staff and leadership in my visit to the organisation last month. As compensation applications increase, I know IBCA are determined to ensure payments are made to people as soon as possible. I will be setting out more on this in due course, but this will include key performance indicators that IBCA will be working towards to make sure that compensation claims are dealt with effectively and efficiently. Of course, decisions on the parameters and eligibility of the scheme remain a decision for the government and subject to parliamentary approval as set out in the regulations I have laid and are not impacted by IBCA's decisions. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me conclude by saying that in laying these regulations we are one step closer to having the entire infected blood compensation scheme fully established in law, and I understand the importance of providing opportunity to everyone across the House to debate the matter. This will be another significant moment for all those who waited too long. On the 30th of January, I was able to meet with a number of representatives from the community to update them on the government's plans, and as ever I found it an invaluable experience, and I'm grateful for those who shared their thoughts and experiences. Madam Deputy Speaker, upon my appointment to this role in July, I was determined to meet the first statutory deadline of 24th of August for the first set of regulations. And over the past 7 months, I've been insistent to my officials and the community on the importance of making sure that after 40 years of injustice, that justice is now finally being delivered and compensation rightly being paid. The budget announced £11.8 billion of funding for this compensation scheme, showing the scale of this government's commitment to concrete action. I hope parliamentarians across both houses will support these regulations so we can finally focus solely on delivering compensation to those who've waited for justice for far too long. I commend this statement to the House.
May I remind the Minister that statements should be limited to 10 minutes, and it is courteous to let the Speaker's office know if a statement will exceed this time. The opposition will, of course, be allocated additional time. I call Mike Wood, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his very thorough statement and for advance sight of it. I want to start by thanking the campaigners and victims who have spent years pushing for justice for this terrible tragedy that occurred over a number of decades. The previous Conservative government took the first steps towards recognising the horrific wrong inflicted on so many patients and their loved ones, opening and concluding the inquiry into the infected blood scandal. A particular acknowledgement must go to my right honourable friend, the member for Salisbury, who worked so hard when he was Paymaster General to make sure that victims and their families could, at last, receive some degree of justice. I welcome the progress that the government has made since the election. Parliamentary politics inevitably focuses on division, and there is plenty on which we profoundly disagree with the government. But on this matter, we speak as one. There is nothing of substance that the Right Honourable Gentleman and his department is doing that is meaningfully different to what we would have done if we had still been in government. We will, of course, review the legislation on the next stage of the infected blood compensation scheme, but the Minister and all those campaigning for justice can be sure that we support the government in its efforts. We welcome the start of compensation payments by the Infected Blood Compensation Authority, but we know that victims have raised concerns as to the pace of processing applications for compensation. I hope the Minister can confirm what measures he is putting in place to ensure that the processing capacity within the authority is adequate and that application processing can be sped up. Because the next phase of the compensation framework will mean that applications to the authority could increase by tens of thousands. And so all victims and their families need to know what is being done to ensure that those claims can be processed at pace. I'm concerned by reports that only a very small fraction of those that may be eligible to claim compensation have been contacted so far. One estimate put it as low as 0.2% of possible claimants, although I recognise that such estimates can sometimes be out of date. And so I hope that the Minister will be able to provide some clarity on the percentage of those believed to be eligible who have been contacted so far, as I know that the Minister will understand the need for government to communicate clearly to all of those who may be eligible to encourage them to apply. This reinforces the importance that must be placed on processing claims quickly. Those eligible must have confidence that their claims will be accurately and quickly processed so that they will receive the payment they are entitled to as soon as possible. I appreciate, of course, the staged manner in which the authority is taking claims and the need to prioritise certain claims. But I do hope that the government can reiterate clearly that no one needs to worry about the capacity within the authority, within the system, particularly as it relates to claims that will be processed in the later stages. I would also ask the Minister to offer some clarity as to his assessment as to whether the funding allocated so far will cover all of the expected claims. We know that it could be up to 140,000 relatives applying for compensation as a result of the planned expansion of claim eligibility. And while I know the government understandably cannot provide an exact estimate of the total funding required, it would go some way to offering reassurance to victims and their families that the funding for the authority will be sufficient to compensate in full all of those who suffered harm or loss, and that all of the operational requirements of the authority are properly provided for. All of us in this House understand the scale and the damage of this scandal and recognise the immense efforts of victims and their families in pushing for justice and welcome the laying of these regulations. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will conclude by repeating my assurance on behalf of His Majesty's opposition that we will work with the government to ensure that everyone who is eligible is aware and that they receive the compensation that they need and they deserve as quickly as possible.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'll ensure that your stricture about time is properly communicated across government. May I start firstly by echoing the Honourable Gentleman's comments about my predecessor as Paymaster General, the Honourable Member for Salisbury, who did so much in government to push this forward. And just as when I was shadowing him, I offered cross-party support, I think the continuing cross-party support today is really important in terms of the speed with which we are able to push this forward in terms of the legal framework that we are putting in place. On the issue of speed, I am restless for progress. And whilst, of course, IBCA is an arm's-length body, it has operational independence. Nonetheless, I will have more to say in due course about key performance indicators, as undoubtedly this House will want to continue to raise the speed of payments being made to constituents. I entirely agree with his comments about clarity of communication. I'm forever emphasising the need to have simple explainer documents around what are, of course, complex regulations. And finally, on the issue of funding, both in terms of the operation of IBCA but also in terms of compensation, the government has already allocated £11.8 billion and we are committed to compensating all the victims of this terrible scandal.
Clive Efford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and the progress that he's made in 7 months, not least on the £11.8 billion that he secured in the budget. He deserves credit for that. Now, it's regrettable that we lost a year from Sir Brian Langstaff's second interim report, where he gave his final recommendations on compensation, stating that the government had no reason to delay setting up the process of paying compensation. So I know my right honourable friend is aware that there are still concerns about the tariff, particularly among those who are infected with Hep C and also those who endured unethical testing. So does he agree with me that whilst we must move ahead with all haste to get people the justice they deserve, IBCA must have the flexibility in its decisions when dealing with those who feel that the tariff does not recognise the suffering that they've endured?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I pay tribute as well to the work he does as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group. Obviously, the tariffs were set on the basis of the expert group that was chaired, and I give my compliments to Sir Jonathan Montgomery for the work that he did in that regard. But the tariffs and the scheme also recognise particular individual circumstances and cases that are more complex. That is why the supplemental route is being put in place. And I would add to that as well, and I saw this when I visited IBCA myself, which I understand my honourable friend will be doing shortly as well, the sympathetic, compassionate approach that is being taken with regard to evidence, given how long ago so much of this happened.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the advance sight of his statement. Liberal Democrats are glad to see the introduction of this legislation and the extension of the infected blood compensation scheme. This scandal is a chilling story of people being failed, not only by the medical professionals who treated them, but by the NHS, who should have been responsible for the safety of their treatment, and by a series of governments who should have prevented the scandal from ever having taken place. We are glad that the new regulations will move the victims, both those infected and affected, closer to long overdue justice. However, we are deeply concerned by the speed at which victims have been receiving compensation, with only 25 people being invited to claim by December last year. It is right that the government is now widening the scheme so that compensation reaches many more people as soon as possible. It is also crucial that as part of this there are mechanisms in place to ensure the concerns of the charities, organisations and affected individuals are heard. To that end, and to provide confidence to victims and their families, can I ask the Minister to outline a timeline of when all victims can expect to have received their long overdue compensation? And furthermore, will the government introduce a duty of candour on public officials so that such a scandal is never repeated?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And just the Honourable Lady is absolutely right that this scandal goes across decades and across governments. Whilst compensation is obviously one of the crucial recommendations, there are a total of 12 recommendations from Sir Brian Langstaff that I will be updating the House about in due course. Whilst at present the IBCA will meet its target of 250 people by the end of next month, the approach they are taking is one of test and learn. It enables them then to scale up more quickly, to be able to do what we all want IBCA to do, which is to get compensation as quickly as reasonably possible to those who need it. I would expect the first payments to the affected to begin before the end of this year. And finally, on the duty of candour, which is another of the Sir Brian Langstaff recommendations, I do expect to be introducing to this House legislation on that before the 15th of April, which of course the Hillsborough anniversary.
Alex Barros-Curtis.
Thank you. I thank my right honourable friend for his statement. I want to focus on what he said about the progress being made in delivering compensation for victims and their families. I recently met with a constituent of mine, Sue Sparks, who lost her husband, Les, owing to infected blood in 1990, and she is concerned that it will take many, many years to make all of these payments. Now, I don't doubt my right honourable friend's commitment and passion on this issue to tackle injustice and deliver the culture change that this issue has indicated, but will he assure Sue and myself that he will ensure that every lever of government is being pulled in order to ensure that all payments to infected and affected individuals are made as a matter of urgency?
I can certainly give my honourable friend that assurance, both to him and to indeed his constituent Sue, that the government will continue to push this forward as quickly as is reasonably possible. I am conscious of the strength of feeling. I am also conscious of victims who've waited decades for justice, and that need for speed is recognised across government.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every member of this House should welcome this statement, as I certainly do, for it is no greater horror imaginable than becoming chronically sick as a result of what ought to be a routine medical procedure, a blood transfusion. So will the honourable gentleman, following the previous questioner, ensure these matters are dealt with promptly? And will he reflect on what the report into these matters describes as institutional failures? And I simply mention the National Audit Office, because the National Audit Office, as you know, looked at compensation for a range of scandals and concluded the following. There's no central coordinated approach when government sets up new compensation schemes, resulting in relatively slow medical approach. It recommends the Cabinet Office review its arrangements to allow schemes to begin and operate in a more timely, effective way. When he returns to the House, will he reflect on that recommendation and perhaps say to the House what the government's going to do in response to it?
Minister.
The right honourable gentleman makes a powerful point, and I think what is crucial in whether it's this compensation scheme or indeed others that have been run by government is we learn the lessons between the different compensation schemes and we learn best practice. And I absolutely agree with him that that is crucial in this compensation scheme as well.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for his statement. Brian Heatley, haemophiliac, was given infected blood products in 1982 at the age of 5, and as a result died in 1996 at the age of 18. His devoted parents, Linda and James, from New Mills in my constituency, High Peak, have been waiting 28 years for compensation, and they are now in their 70s. Can the Minister confirm that the new regulations will mean that it may be possible for the victims who have lost loved ones in this scandal, like Linda and James, to receive compensation, both their own compensation and for the estate of their loved ones?
I speak for the whole House in sending our sympathies to Linda and James and the just indescribable sense of loss and experience that they've been through over so many years. And the answer to his question is yes, these consolidated regulations are both for the estates of infected people, but also for the affected as well. But I know, and I know the whole House would agree, that there is no amount of money that can make up for that awful experience.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much and most sincerely for his statement. I think there's nobody in the House isn't reassured by what the Minister said, and I know that he also referred to the regional administrations and how it will affect them, and he's had those discussions, the Minister's had those discussions with the administrations as well. But reports today that only 0.2% of eligible family members have been contacted about the scheme, and concerns that this scheme does not have the capacity to cope with the numbers of potential applicants. Can the Minister perhaps outline just how he, as Minister, will ensure that there is capacity to have all of those families, that they will have a sense of recognition and be very, very definite about a form of restitution? Thank you so much.
Minister.
Say to the honourable gentleman, firstly, in terms of numbers, as I indicated, IBCA are operating a test and learn approach that then allows them to scale up. They will, of course, scale up their capacity alongside that to ensure they do have the capacity that they require to process the claims. As I indicated, I visited IBCA last month. I can already see that scaling start to take place, and he can certainly give assurance to his constituents that the government will continue to do all it can to ensure the swift delivery of compensation.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for today's update. My Western Bartonshire constituent Fiona was infected with hepatitis B following blood transfusions in 1954 and 1985. Fiona is apparently not entitled to any form of support or compensation payment because of missing medical records and because of receiving a transfusion both before and after the 1972 cut-off relating to screening for hepatitis B. Will the Minister agree to meet with my constituent and I to discuss this matter and ensure that she and others affected in similar circumstances, apparently a small number, can receive compensation and receive justice under this Labour government?
Firstly, could I just say generally with regard to evidence that the Infected Blood Compensation Authority has said that when an individual is invited to make their claim, they will aim to gather some of the information, including medical records and information about an applicant's condition and severity from organisations that already have it. Now, that should mean those claiming will be asked for the least amount of information possible. I know IBCA are currently considering what guidance can be provided for people ahead of making a claim. Specifically in relation to my honourable friend's constituent, Fiona, if he sends me the details, I'm more than happy to look into that particular case.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I also thank the Minister for the thoroughness and thoughtfulness with which he's made his statement today. I think he would agree that there are still issues around speed, quantum, flexibility and care. Am I right in thinking that the IBCA organisation does not have any flexibility about the amount of damages paid, and if so, can he give a rough indication of what sort of compensation is paid where someone has lost their lives as a result of being poisoned by the NHS? And is it the case that people have to make an individual settlement, an agreement on what they will accept? And if so, is there any professional support that someone can get who might be quite ill before they sign on the dotted line and possibly sign away their rights to rather more compensation than they might otherwise receive?
With regard to the first point from the Honourable Gentleman about the tariffs, they have been set out and indeed published. There are then assessments to be made about severity, of course, within the tariff bands. There's also, as I've indicated as well, a supplementary route for more complex cases. There isn't a single figure I can give him across these cases. They obviously vary, but you will gradually see the overall amount being published by IBCA. With regard to his second point, what is crucial is that IBCA will have particular claim managers. I've met the first claim managers myself only in recent weeks, so that a victim making an application will have that person to speak to guide them through the process. And I know the culture being imbued by Sir Robert Francis is an enabling culture about helping victims, particularly with evidence. I've also signed off both for legal support and indeed for financial support as well, because it is about receiving what are in so many cases life-changing sums of money.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I first of all thank my right honourable friend for the update. Despite his sterling efforts, and I really mean that, I've got to say that this process has taken far too long. There's victims dying at the rate of 2 per week, never seeing the compensation which they deserve. Victims are very much unaware. They're desperate to understand what and how much compensation there might even be due under this process. I wonder if the Minister can say how many of the 5,000 infected victims will be invited to apply to the scheme during 2025. And I wonder if he could confirm if he's considered or if there's a potential for consideration to be given allowing victims to take SSP as a lump sum payment without any reductions.
Firstly, in relation to the question about people having a sense of the amount of money they're going to get, the government published explainer documents in August last year and indeed in recent days that are on the government website, but the Infected Blood Compensation Authority is intending to publish a compensation calculator for the infected core award by the end of March. With regard to my honourable friend's other points, the numbers of victims who are paid is going to be regularly published by IBCA during the course of the year. The payments to the infected have started. I expect payments to the affected to begin before the end of the year. And as regard to the support schemes, one of the changes the government made to the scheme was that there could be both a lump sum payment and the continuation of the support schemes. That was something that came through from the consultation that Sir Robert Francis undertook during the general election campaign. I've made, obviously, that change to the scheme, and how that works precisely is set out in the explainer documents.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to Paymaster General for this update. Indeed, he has given several updates to the House, and I'm grateful to him for that. My North East Fife constituent was infected a number of years ago and involved in the campaign for a long time. He has shared concerns about the evidential standard, particularly in relation to medical records, that's being expected of claimants. And indeed, his lawyers have told me that they have concerns that case managers are not correctly interpreting the initial date of infection because medical records are not available to be able to substantiate that, as well as concerns that the Australian antigen has not been properly understood as an indicator of HBV. Is the Paymaster General aware of those concerns, and can he comment on them?
I think the Honourable Lady is entirely right to raise the issue of evidence. I mean, there's the specific issue that she referred to, but there is also a far more general problem here of the incidents are often a long time ago. But secondly, we also know that in some cases there was deliberate destruction of records. So clearly the level of evidence is a significant issue. As I've indicated, when I visited IBCA, I heard from the claims managers themselves about the approach they are taking, the culture that is being imbued of an enabling culture, and that IBCA will aim to gather some of the information itself to assist victims. I think it's going to be a vital part of this process.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome my Right Honourable friend's statement and his commitment on this issue? Can he say a little more about how he's working with colleagues in Scotland to drive forward the final compensation scheme? Because I share concerns that have already been expressed by members across the House about the need for speed in ensuring that victims receive the compensation that they so rightly deserve.
But firstly, just to assure my honourable friend that I do work closely with the devolved administrations on this issue of compensation. But there is a broader point as well that, of course, when we think back to the events, particularly of the 1970s, 1980s and beyond, they occurred in the pre-devolution age. And what will also be the case over the next few months is, as we look to implement the rest of Sir Brian Langstaff's recommendations, that partnership work with the devolved administration is going to become even more important.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Paymaster General for an advance copy of his statement. I recognise the sincerity and the hard work that he and his colleagues are putting in to progress this vital compensation scheme. I also understand the need for he and his colleagues to take small initial steps in order to test their systems and processes. But legal representatives fear, as others have referred to already, that many will die while they wait, and justice delayed is justice denied. Does the Minister really think that it's good enough given the numbers involved? Will he consider strengthening the authorities' teams as they process these claims so that the pace can be rapidly accelerated and so that they can meet the forthcoming key performance indicators to which he's referred? And finally, the last time we spoke about this across the Chamber, he gave me an undertaking that he would look at the role of voluntary organisations who provide vital support to claimants, and he told me that he would consider putting that funding on a statutory basis. So can he comment on that as well, please? Thank you.
Just on the honourable gentleman's first point, he mentioned myself and my colleagues, but of course IBCA is an arm's length body. It's operationally independent, so they take operationally independent decisions as to how best to ensure that they do pay out money to as many people as quickly as possible. And they've decided to adopt, as I say, the test and learn approach to make that possible. I should also say, in respect of the voluntary organisations, that is one of Sir Brian Langstaff's recommendations, that we do look at support for them, and of course that will be alongside all 12 recommendations, part of an update to the House that I will give in due course. But the assurance I give to the honourable gentleman generally is that I am restless for progress. I will continue to be restless for progress. And on his specific point about IBCA scaling up, having more staff, more claims managers, that's precisely what they're doing at the moment.
Lee Ingham. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement and update today. I have a constituent in my constituency of Stafford, Eccleshall and the Villages, Janet, who's in her 80s. She tragically lost her husband and her second husband to infected blood, and she's due to receive compensation as their next of kin. She would like to make sure that she can pass this payment on to their children once, as he rightly said, they are victims too. However, she's been advised that if this was to happen, it would constitute a secondary transfer and be subject to inheritance tax. As I said, these are people that lost their father and their stepfather to this issue. Would the Minister agree to meet with me to explore whether a solution can be found in these cases?
So, first of all, I just should say, for clarity, that all IBCA compensation payments made to those in the UK will be exempt from income tax, capital gains tax and inheritance tax. It means anyone in direct receipt of compensation from IBCA or as a beneficiary of an estate paid compensation on behalf of the deceased does not need to pay income tax, capital gains tax or inheritance tax on the amount they receive. Now, I am aware of the concern that my honourable friend is talking about, which is a slightly different situation, and I'm more than happy if she would write me with the details of that case to look into it.
And the final question on the statement, Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd also like to thank the Paymaster General not only for his statement today, but for his clarity and commitment in his answers. As he may remember from previous occasions in the Chamber, I have personal experience of having lost a very close family friend in the 1990s who was a victim of this, and his widow died without compensation, and his children are now among those waiting to hear what would happen. I thank the Minister for his application and his commitment in this, but there still remains the issue, as others have mentioned, of speed and of best practice going forward. He mentioned he is going to simplify the process. So can he tell us, will we in future be able to have updates from him on what the government is doing to examine best practice and how future victims of scandals like this can be assured that they will not have to wait as long as 40 years?
Minister.
I think, as on the last occasion, I expressed my sympathies to the Honourable Lady for the loss of her family friend back in the 1990s. And, of course, I'm always looking to share best practice. As I said, in a moment ago to the Right Honourable Gentleman for South Holland, the deepening is no longer in his place. I think that is vitally important going forward. And I can also give her the undertaking that firstly, I will continue to update this House, as I hope honourable members and right honourable members have seen I've been doing over the last 7 months. I will continue to do so. There will also be a debate on these regulations. I will have to update on the 12 Sir Brian Langstaff recommendations by the deadline of May. But IBCA will also be providing regular updates via our newsletter, and I would refer her to those as well.
That concludes the statement.